Resilience is about having something to expand into. And that just stayed with me because I was like, how can I make the impact I want to make on the world if my cup is already full?
Catherine Joy White, author, actor, filmmaker, gender expert, founder of Kusini Productions, and Forbes 30 Under 30 Honorary.
Every single thing that I'd ever held and cherished in my life melted and disappeared in that moment because none of it mattered. I don't wait to be included anymore. I carve a space for myself and I look for ways to bring other people up with me. My number one thing is to remember that only you can tell the story that you're telling right now. If not you, then who? Someone's going to do it, so why not you?
Happy International Women's Day, and what an amazing event we have today. So, Catherine, you've been Forbes 30 Under 30, gender equality expert. You've had a series of author, writing, and also acting. So, wanted to hear a bit more about your career and tell me a bit more about how this all kind of began.
Yeah. I mean, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Really nice to be here. Really nice to meet you all. And as you've heard, I live and breathe gender equality. That's kind of my modus operandi. And that's kind of manifested in creative arts through acting, writing, filmmaking, and publishing my debut book. I'm now my second book and write my third book, but also in the advocacy side with being a gender advisor to the UN and an ambassador for Papyrus, which is the UK's young suicide prevention charity, and just kind of finding routes to use my platform, I suppose, as a voice for change. In terms of how it started, I mean, how does anything start? With a passion, with a sort of gut instinct feeling. Like when I was a kid, people were playing with Barbies or out riding their bike, but I was like Emmeline Pankhurst till I die, which is a weird thing for a 5-year-old, but I was obsessed with these. I had a book of like women who changed the world, and I was obsessed with these figures, Emmeline Pankhurst, Rosa Parks, the really like well-known ones at that point, but people who had stood for something and had something to lose and gone on to kind of use what they knew and what they felt strongly about to make a difference. I'm not from London. I'm from quite a small town in the Midlands. It's called Northampton. It's famous for nothing except shoes. If anyone saw the film Kinky Boots, that's actually a Northampton. That is our one claim to fame. But it was a space where I think you're expected to follow a particular route. So most of my school friends stayed in that town. They had their kids and got married really young. They didn't go to uni. And I think I always felt like a bit of an outlier, which I think is the key to going on and making something and doing something, because you look around you and you think, well, I don't fit in here. So how do I find a way to belong and to make sure that other people like me belong? So I think I'll, leave it there for now.
I love that fact about belonging. And you've got a book called This Thread of Gold. We just recently had World Book Day, sent the kids off with the outfits. What inspired that book? And tell us a bit more about your role as an author.
Yeah. So I don't know, anyone that's spoken to me, you can tell me if I'm accurate in saying this, but I am a firm believer in the power of joy to change the world. And I think we exist in a space where, especially if we're speaking about Black women, which is what that book is about, we hear a lot about oppression, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how we can elevate and excavate voices and stories that have already existed. How can we use those stories and inspire the next generation with them? And I often think about 5-year-old me. I speak about her a lot. What did she need to see? And how can I ensure that a 5-year-old right now is able to be armed, equipped and tooled to go out into the world with everything that she needs or they need to navigate that space? And I think in particular with this Thread of Gold, it came out of my research I'd done as my master's degree at Oxford, where I wrote about Black women using food as a means of resistance. But I just knew it was going to be a book. I knew, not an academic book, I knew it was going to be a best-selling trade book. How do you pitch that to publishers when it's somewhat niche, I suppose? Not to me, it's my lived experience, but to them it's niche. So I armed myself and I made sure that I'm a gender expert for United Nations. I'm an actor, I'm a filmmaker, I have a profile, and I packaged it really well to bring to agents who then brought it to publishers, and was able for that first UK sale to have a 6-figure book deal. We then sold to the US and did the same thing. What does that mean in practice? It's about practicing what I preach. It's about ensuring that I know it's like we hate each other, but we really like each other. But it's about ensuring that this is about lifting women's voices from, in some cases, obscurity, but it's also about being able to celebrate those that are here right now. So some of the figures we looked at were modern day politicians, women in my own family, as well as just figures from history. And I think that there's so much in what we read. You know, World Book Day, you spoke about children who read for pleasure. That's the single biggest indicator of future success. It's not parental income. It's not parental background. It's reading for the sheer joy of reading. And there are so many children still in the UK right now who will have got their first book on the 7th of March this year. And that can be the single biggest factor that goes on to change their lives and potentially the lives of everyone who's going to come through the world after them. So I don't think books are this archaic relic. I think there is so much that we can do with the power of the written word. And I'm going to keep shouting about that for as long as I can.
And you also have a book around food, which is, such a prevalent topic at the moment with health, mental well-being. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, really exciting. I'm actually curating a series of books. So the series is called Rebel Takes, and it's the idea that it started off when I pitched it as being young voices, and then I was like, okay, it's not necessarily just young people we need to hear from, but it's people who have been sidelined or marginalised. And so I've written the first book, it's Rebel Takes on the future of food, and it looks at how we can use food as a positive change maker in society. So what does it look like if hunger is eradicated? What does it look like if the world adopts vegetarian practices? And in fact, I'm currently looking for authors. So the next book is going to be on periods. I hope I'm not doing a spoiler because we haven't actually announced that yet.
We love a spoiler.
But there'll be 5 books in total in that series. And the idea is that we're really changing a narrative, but with a hopeful and optimistic outlook. So not just how do we talk about the problems that exist, how do we offer practical solutions? And they're sort of bite-sized books, these ones. They're not huge manifestos. They're sort of practical things that people can pick up and think, maybe I'll try a vegetarian diet for the next year and see what that does. Or, what does it look like if we actually work towards ensuring that, the UK does not have a food poverty crisis that it currently does. So yeah, hit me up if you've got an idea.
I think we had a really lovely conversation about role models. I guess there's 2 sorts of role models I've had in my life. One is when you read something and then you kind of think, wow, I really want to share this with someone else. And the other is someone you've met and really impacts the trajectory of your life. So we'd love to hear your sort of role models and how they've actually impacted your life.
I've got so many, but I would say I've obviously never met this woman because she died 100 years before I was born. But there's an amazing woman called Hattie McDaniel. She was the first ever Black person who won an Oscar. But she won the Oscar for playing the role of the Mammy in Gone with the Wind. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that. So it was really, really controversial at the time because that was a film that was a huge success, but the Mammy was seen as being quite reductive and bringing people back to caricatures of slavery. And she kind of faced the racism from Hollywood. She wasn't even allowed to attend the Oscars. But she also had this total criticism from within the Black community who thought that she was, doing them a disservice and basically perpetuating racial stereotypes. But there's so much that she did. So she refused, the N-word is in the book, but she refused to utter that word in the film, so she never says that word. She also kind of carried herself with this dignity and went on to change the landscape of, the film industry that I'm in now. But she also was just an icon. So she got married 4 times. And I think that's really sexy. She was this sort of big, larger-than-life character, but she just had all these husbands. And there's this photo of her in a fur coat and nothing else underneath it. And I just think that's so exciting and iconic. And she threw a deathbed party where everyone came and visited her. And she was just lying in bed dying, but sipping champagne with flowers in her hair. I was like, what a way to defy stereotypes.
Great life.
Yes. And she did all sorts of other things that no one knows about. Like there was a sort of segregation campaign at the time in LA, and black people and white people couldn't buy houses together. And she organised this like sort of community covenant where the residents got together, and she essentially ended segregated housing in LA, which is just a by the by, but sort of the activism and the sort of personal beauty of being an unlikely sex icon whilst also making history. And I think that's a role model for me, because she didn't follow one path, and she's sprinted so many amazing things where she says, I've never apologised for the roles I play. And I think that's something we can all take. You know, we can't apologise for what we do. If we know why we're doing what we're doing, we know that even if the circumstances we're in right now can't recognise it, history will recognise it. And I think that's the case with Hattie McDonough. It's only now that people are starting to sort of say, I think we did her a disservice. I think we criticised her too much. She existed in the world she lived in. And I like that I have never apologised. I hold that.
That's amazing. And what about someone who is in your life at the moment that kind of is your role model? Sounds like you've got a lot, but someone special?
Do you know what? I'm going to break the curve and actually talk about a man. I know it's International Women's Day, but we need allies, and I'm loving our men here today as well, so thank you. But I think, so I mean, before we got to the UN and the filmmaking, I was fixated on being a lawyer. That was just, it was a done thing. I was going to study law and French law and eventually become a human rights lawyer. And my dad is a Yorkshireman. He was a teacher for years. He's now a gardener. And he's the sort of man that I think he's told me he loves me. I don't know if he's told me he loves me. You don't see emotions from that man. And he also doesn't get involved. He just keeps himself to himself. There's my mum sort of doing everything. And my dad, you know, he's there. And I'm sure he appreciates all the things I'm working hard to do, but he doesn't get involved. And I remember one day I came back from a sort of scheme. I think I'd gone to Oxford, this scheme for like stay school kids who want to apply to Oxford. And I was filled with all this excitement. I'm going to apply to law. I'm going to become a lawyer. I'm going to study law at Oxford. And my mum was pleased, because I think that's quite exciting to most parents. But my dad was sat there in the corner of the room. And I remember I came in later and he just sat there really quietly and then said, don't study law. And I was like, why? Like, what parent would say that to their child? And he didn't even give me a reason. He just said, you're more than that. And I didn't study law. I went on to study English and French, then did my master's in women's studies. But if I had studied law, I don't think I'd be here today giving you this talk for sure. I'd be, you know, in a sort of average, I think, job. Maybe I'd be a human rights lawyer, maybe I wouldn't.
Still be in the office.
I'd be in the office, yeah. And then, exactly, sleeping under my desk tonight and then waking up to carry on. And I just think that's the sort of, sometimes we can get those words from someone and they come at just the right time, but it's a guide in the right way, especially when it comes from someone that doesn't typically express those emotions and feelings and even guidance. And I'm so happy that I listened to that piece of advice.
Amazing. It's International Women's Day and we have got a lot of male here in the room. What's your sort of ask to them in the room regarding advocacy or things that they should be aware of? As the world is quite different at the moment with a lot of tensions going on. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, firstly, what you're doing, every single man in this room, you've showed up, so show up. I think that is half of it. There's so much when you feel that you're alone in something, and it's women who are continually showing up for women or marginalised groups. But when you just show up, that's already half of it, I think. How can we ensure that we are not perpetuating stereotypes? You know, don't assume that because someone's a woman, they're going to require things that, I guess, feed into that existing stereotype. But I do think, for me, there's something about your presence that is an unspoken or a very physical allyship. And that's really, really important. And, you know, the main thing as well is, I guess, call out when you hear something among your peers, when you see something, to call it out, because you will have more of an impact than a woman could to call out the same behaviour. That's super important. And then if you're in a position of power and authority, elevate. Make sure that you offer those opportunities. Look for every opportunity to elevate people who may face discrimination to get there.
And I guess there's one for me to add as well. Always ask questions. If you don't understand something or it's something outside of the realm of what you're doing, just ask the question and you'll learn a lot more. I do that quite a lot.
There's no stupid question. It's like, don't be afraid to say, like, sorry, I don't actually understand that. What does that look like? Or how can I help? Don't be afraid, yeah.
I've seen that you've got some amazing award-winning performances as being an actor. I guess it'd be good to hear about what those are and the ones that you're the most proud of, and a bit about how you actually found those roles, because there's people in the room who want to understand if they want to follow a career in acting or in being an author. How did you actually start some of those opportunities? How do they come about?
Roles that I'm most proud of, maybe I'll go the other way around. Maybe I'll go, how did you start? And that will maybe answer that. How did I start acting? That came from uni, the master's. So I was doing this UN internship and set on this career at the UN, gender equality advisor, had a job offer waiting for me for when I graduated. But Oxford has this amazing theatre scene, and I started acting and working on plays while I was there, and ended up getting an agent and ended up having a West End role when I graduated. And I was faced with this really difficult decision. Do I take the job at the UN, which is security for life, I guess, and my dream?
But is it?
And is it what I want? Or do I take the chance for a really insecure profession where I may never know how I'm going to pay my rent for the next month? But ultimately, I sort of did something quite logical, and I'm not necessarily a logical thinker, but I thought, I'm pretty young. I can always go back and work at the UN. I'm not going to go and, try and be an actor when I'm 30 or 40s, which now I'm like, I would. But at the time, so I took that chance and I did the play and I worked in the theatre and kind of did that. COVID happened, shut everything down. And I was working part-time remotely for the UN during all of this. So it was sort of working out. And then COVID happened, shut everything down. And I realised that there was a space for me to kind of carve and tell the stories that I wanted to tell, which I guess as a young actor I wasn't necessarily seeing. I was playing a lot of like girlfriends and sort of, things that didn't exactly feel like they were changing the narrative and driving things forward. So I set up my production company. I started producing a lot of films, one of which I was in. The rest of them I wasn't in at that point. I was, how can I facilitate other people telling their stories? And those films did really well and won lots of awards. And yeah, Forbes 30 under 30 happened. That was a shock, but
actually,
thank you. There was a recognition of those stories, all of which were kind of elevating marginalised voices at the time. And well, they still are, I don't know what I said at the time. And eventually, 2021 now, we're sort of halfway through the lockdown. I think we're in mid-lockdown 2, going into lockdown 3. And I woke up one morning in my WhatsApp group chat and there was a message, and I'll always remember the fact that I found that on WhatsApp, which was that my friend had taken his own life. And all of the sort of every single thing that I'd ever held and cherished in my life melted and disappeared in that moment because none of it mattered. Cut to, I guess, a lot of grief and a lot of soul searching. And eventually I started swimming. I lived in Oxford at the time, and I started swimming in this lake right near my house because it was the only activity we were allowed to do at that time. Do you remember we had the 1 hour thing a day? Yeah. So my thing was to go and get in this sort of freezing cold lake. It just became this sort of like ritual. And at some point after that, I realised that it was starting to make me feel better and I was starting to heal somehow. Not really. I couldn't even attend the funeral. It was all on Zoom. So you never have that goodbye. But I recognised that something was shifting. So I turned it into a screenplay. I wrote a film about a young woman who starts swimming after she lost in the film her father to suicide. It wasn't anything at that point. It was just like, this is a sort of release. But I recognised and found, I was searching, there were no sort of narratives at the time that were about suicide and about what it looks like to heal the grief after that. How do you pick yourself up from that? And then that project just got some legs and it became my obsession. And that is unfortunately something that you need in the film industry, but in actually any industry. You need to live and breathe, and that is your every waking thought. And my every waking thought was, I am going to get this film made, and this film is going to go on and change people's lives. And it, we got the film made. We spoke about Celia Imrie earlier. She starred in the film. We had, I think it won over 50 awards worldwide. It got Oscar, BAFTA, BIFA qualified. It's now on American Airlines. It sort of just did things that I could never have imagined. But I was also in that film, which was a really difficult thing at the time. Like, can I be in a story that's so personal? And I almost didn't, but I'm so glad I did, because it was the biggest personal growth, and it was a sort of healing, but it was also a professional, like, landmark. And that film changed my career. There are moments sometimes, and that film changed my entire career, but also self. So I would say that has to be the role I'm most proud of so far.
Wow, what a story, guys. That deserves a round of applause. And I guess I wanted to ask a bit about what's next. And really, thank you for sharing that. It actually impacted me as well. So thank you. So with regards to sort of what's next, a lot of people talk about a vision, legacy, the things that you want to aspire to do next. What's next?
A lot of things, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I think, so filmmaking wise, I have a documentary I'm shooting this month, which is called Swim Sisters, and it features, among others, Alice Dearing. She's the first Olympic athlete to represent GB as a swimmer, first ever black woman. So we've got Alice Dearing, and it's being exec produced by Afua Hirsch and Amanda Critchlow, incredible, icons. So that shoots this month, and that's really about how do we change a narrative around black women swimming, but in a documentary form. You will see me in the next series of Bridgerton. So hopefully, if anyone watches that will be an exciting thing. That was, wow, that was an amazing project to work on. I can't say too much about it, but it was like definitely a bucket list to be on that set and just see
You're in two of my favourite programmes. So Bridgerton is one, and Black Mirror, you were in both.
I love Black Mirror, yeah. They were both amazing shows to work on. So there's that. And I'm writing my novel. So I've obviously written 2 non-fiction books so far, but I'm now writing a novel, which feels really exciting. And you heard it here first. We're going to be on the Women's Prize for Fiction and hopefully the Booker Prize shortlist. Let's call it into existence.
So what I'm going to ask you next. How do you find time to do all this inspiring stuff? And, we've had conversations about, what you've done in the past and what you're going to do next. How do you manage your time?
Do you know what? My answer, if you'd asked me this last year, would have been really different. Because last year I would have said, oh my gosh, I don't sleep. I live and breathe what I do. I'm so passionate. You just find the time and that's how you do it. And then I got super burnt out, as probably a lot of us in this room have experienced. And I had a chat with the doctor, and I'll never forget what she told me. And she said to me that resilience is about having something to expand into. And that just stayed with me, because I was like, how can I make the impact I want to make on the world if my cup is already full? And so this year, my time looks really different. Like last year, you probably wouldn't have found the time to get me to be here. Every second was booked. This year, I make sure I have at least an evening a week where I have no commitment. I, without any exception, work out daily. I carve things into my time that are just for me and will make me feel better. And that's weirdly given my work more focus and I think more longevity, Forbes 30, but I don't want to burn out before I reach the next. Exactly. And I think that's probably something that all of us, every person in this room is, I'm sure, burning the candle at both ends. So yeah, how do I manage my time now? By carving in something that's going to fill me back up and ensure that I've always got some space to expand into.
I love the way you tell stories. Even listening to you here, I felt so many different emotions. I guess that's something that's probably a skill that a lot of people in the room might want to learn or be more kind of akin to be able to do that in a room. Do you have any tips for people who are trying to tell stories or getting presentations and trying to work on their confidence? It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. My number one thing is to remember that only you can tell the story that you're telling right now. Do not talk yourself out of it. You are the only person that can tell your story. And there's that real cliche quote, like, if not me, who? If not now, when? But it's actually helpful. If not you, then who? Someone's going to do it. So why not you? And I also think that 5-year-old me, this image that I hold of 5-year-old me, is helpful. What does the younger you, what did they need to see? And what legacy are you hoping to leave on those that come after? And I think that is such a sort of, it's something to hold on to when you're finding yourself struggling to remember the why. It's like, well, someone needs this, and you are helping to open a door for someone else to do the same thing.
The 5-year-old you and the 5-year-old me would have got along so well.
We'd have been friends. We'd have been playing on our bikes and talking about Emily Hancock.
Each other. So I guess I wanted to learn a bit more about your thoughts on inclusion and diversity. It's such a hot topic at the moment. It's quite a difficult area with everything that's happening in kind of the political environment. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts of experiences you've had, if you're willing to share.
In terms of
when you felt included or not included or wanting to drive change.
I think I don't wait to be included anymore. I carve a space for myself and I look for ways to bring other people up with me. I think, I don't know what the future of like EDI practices are, and I think EDI practices are flawed in themselves anyway. And we are going to see a huge change in every single workplace, not just because of Trump, just also naturally. So I think let's not, we know what's right. We have the law. We also know what instinctively is right. How can we ensure that we are reaching out, we are lifting people up with us, we're always trying to be compassionate, we're always being respectful? And especially, I think it's about people like us, change makers, making a way when there seems to be no way, and ensuring that we're never shutting the door behind us and saying, I made my way up here, good luck to the rest of you. That, to me, is the worst kind of person. You got where you got to, great. That's amazing. Do not talk about why it was so hard for you and everyone else needs to figure it out. No, open the door and allow people to see what else can be achieved. And I think in terms of the future of EDI, I hope it will morph into something that's more sustainable. And actually, we spoke earlier about, having the right intentions or not having the right intentions when things are just done for sort of show. That's not helpful. We need to move beyond that. We're kind of at phase 1. We need to just move to phase 10, I think.
For sure. And I guess with myself, like, one of the things that's really important is to go back to schools, because the career that I got into, I would have considered if someone hadn't come to talk about it. What's your kind of thoughts on some of the younger generation, some of the challenges they face in a very different environment, and how do you kind of promote going back into the next generation and trying to help them?
I mean, I totally agree. I spent most of last week in schools. Obviously, this is a busy month, Women's History Month, but I spent most of last week going in and speaking to mainly girls and saying, come on, like, my favourite talk is kind of on finding your superpower. And so I do different workshops around that with schools. But I think it might be in your workplace or in whatever your line of work is, to be able to open up whether it's like offering a 1-hour Zoom, or because I feel like most people here, we don't have traditional careers where, like the lawyer thing. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to change the world. But a human rights lawyer was the only thing I knew about. And that was actually because I'd seen Legally Blonde. Do you know what I mean? I needed someone to go into a school and be like, you can change the world in other ways. And that, I always say you can't be what you don't see. I saw Elle Woods, but someone else is going to see whatever it is that you're doing, and that's their way in. So I think be visible. I know not everyone loves social media, but it's a really powerful platform, and to use it to show what you're doing. And every so often, so Black Mirror, I actually got my part in Black Mirror because I worked on it as a director's mentee, and I got that role as the director's mentee because she put a call out on Instagram and said, I'm looking for applications from like young POC women directors. I'd only directed one film at that point, and I was scared to apply, but I thought, you know what? If not me, who? If not now, when? Applied. She had thousands of applications. I got that part. I worked, with Charlie Brooker, I worked across the show, and I also ended up having this like small part in it, which ended up, again, being career changing. So social media is powerful. And like, yeah, with Swim Sisters, I'm going to have a mentee shadowing me. And I'm also reaching out to lots of brands to see how they can support that. If looking for corporate sponsors as well, if anyone wants to get involved with that. So it's like, how do you connect with those around you as well and ensure that whatever you're doing, you're opening the door and you're reaching up to kind of elevate people?
I love your outfit, by the way. So yeah, is that?
Oh no, it's actually not. That's just ASOS.
Shout out to ASOS. Shout out to ASOS. So bye. I'm just going to now invite Aisha up to talk about the future generation.
Yeah. As somebody who is new to the film industry, I just wanted to ask you like a couple of questions about like navigating your way through it, especially these days, especially after COVID. The film industry has gone really messed up is the word. Yeah. So I started my own company, film production company 2 years ago, and I noticed that you also had your own one. Yeah. And I wanted to ask, like, what made you decide, to create one? Because as a filmmaker, you don't need to, create a company to make films. You can just be an independent filmmaker and make different films with different people. But, what made you make yours, and why did you think you needed to make it? And what impact do you think your film companies had in the film industry you're currently trying to change?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. So I came to the space as an actor, obviously, and I had roles and was on sets where I felt uncomfortable, but you're young and you feel grateful for every opportunity at that point, so you don't say anything. So there was that side of things. There was also this like burning desire to tell different stories. And at that time I hadn't written anything, but I felt like I had a voice and I felt like I had some way of using it. So those were the two compounding factors there. Then I watched this film. It was called Countdown at Kusini. And it's not actually a very good film, I don't think, in my opinion. However, it's the first ever major motion picture which was made entirely by a group of Black women. And this is in 1976, and they were fed up with how they're being portrayed on screen, and they were fed up with stories being told about them, but they weren't for them. So they got together, and it was an American sorority, and then they sort of got the community involved, and they raised the money from among themselves, made the film themselves, and it got released by Columbia. And I was like, that is so inspiring. So I founded my company. It was called Kusini Productions in honor of Countdown at Kusini, that film. And I felt a drive, an urgent drive to tell the stories that weren't being told, but also tell them in non-traditional ways. So you have the BFI, you have the BBC, but if we take, for example, 54 Days, which is the swimming film, I financed that film by, lots of different brands. So I had Soul Cap, which is a swimming cap for afros, weeds, braids. I had Dry Robe. If anyone swims, they're like the outdoor swimming robes that you wear and stay warm. I had an amazing mental health women's charity from Brighton called Seabirds. I had various specific individuals. And I financed the whole film in this totally unconventional way. But what that then meant was that because that film did so well, then I had the BBC and I had the BFI and I had these more traditional routes. But I always stayed true to that. I'm like, how can we tell stories from among the community? And I think no matter what, I'm now going on to do my next film stars Stephen Fry, which is so exciting. And they're feature-length films now. But I like this idea of telling a story with a mission and with a drive. That film's about, it's a folk horror, but it's about water pollution. That's at its heart. And using a different way of telling stories as well is really important to me, and showing that there's another way of doing things.
Yeah, I find that really inspiring, especially because in these days you don't really have... The industry is, especially Hollywood, is a lot about remakes. And it's sad to kind of see like the detail in film being wasted on like things that have already been told. And there are so many filmmakers out there who want to like tell their own story and different stories. So it's nice that you've created like this space to kind of invite people in to tell a story that you might not see on screen these days. But I also wanted to ask a second question. So you mentioned the Oscars earlier, and it kept reminding me about the film Honorary that won Best Picture this year. I've heard like some controversial views about Honorary. Some people think it deserved to win and some people think it didn't. Because the idea of the film is to try and empower women and show women's place in the world. What did you think of the film, and like, did you think that the message succeeded?
I really like the film. I've heard the controversy. I think what I agree with the controversy was Mikey Madison's saying about kind of not needing or not wanting an intimacy coordinator. I got that because I think it's really important, the sort of choreography of sex scenes and ensuring that everyone feels protected. And I think whilst it's great that they didn't need that on that set, it sort of perpetuates maybe a harmful image overall. And I think that's again where it's like thinking about how just because something worked for you, just because you got to a certain position, that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for everyone else. So again, the sort of recognition that our words have power, and to have a wider lens than just our reality. So it's great that worked for her, but I think it could have been said with more nuance, I suppose, that might not be the case for everyone, because of course we have this whole history of, exploitation in those kind of scenes.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously people comparing it a lot to the Substance film with Demi Moore, and the idea of her losing to a much younger actress because Hollywood has this idea of sexual is more appealing, especially women in that position for the male gaze. Did you agree with that point, or did you think that, the film was made for more empowering and made to stance, and that you kind of had to go through that male gaze to kind of see how women were being treated and how that journey in the film was taken?
I think it's really complicated because I think Mikey Madison's an incredible actress and had an amazing performance. I think Demi Moore is gutting that she didn't get it after all these years. I think horror has a particularly difficult time in Hollywood, and I'm directing a horror, so I'm very much aware of this. But I hope that Demi Moore now also has a rightly deserved resurgence and attention back on her, and I'm sure it won't be her last chance. But yeah, I mean, for sure, Hollywood has a problem with ageism. That's not a secret, I don't think.
Yeah, but thank you for answering my question. I mean, I could talk about films all day, but then we'd be here all night. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking time to answer them, and yeah, I really liked your answers and I found them really inspiring. So
thank you, Aisha. I loved your questions.
Yeah.
Do we have any other audience questions, please?
I have one.
It's good.
Thank you. Well, let me thank you for such an inspiring session. I think what you shared really hits the heart in terms of a lot of chords. One thing you said was, you don't wait to be included. You carve your own place. Mm-hmm. Speaking of ageism and film industry, how do one address it? What if at age of 30 or 40, one wants to start a career in film industry, acting or production? Production is still easy, but in acting, how should one go about?
That's a really important question. And I've certainly checked my own privileges there, because as I say, at the time when I looked to move into this industry, I was like, I'll do it now because I'm young. That was an internalized thing that I had. And the industry is ageist. My biggest advice would be to tell your own stories and make that wave for yourself. And there are some amazing older women, kind of film directors and writers who are out there right now. I think it's hardest for actors because the acting industry is founded on youth and beauty. But I think there are different stories, and there are stories that haven't been told. There's actually a real gap for real stories, about what happens after the age of 30, especially if they're authentically told. So I think it's about writing and creating those yourself. And there's a Women Over 50 film festival that exists now. There's the inklings of change, but again, it does require, I believe, sort of passionate people to change that. And then it's also on people like me, and I'm always looking for stories. Now if someone sends me a coming of age script, I'm a bit like, it better be doing something different. I'm interested in, and recent film I produced starring Juliet Stevenson was this amazing sort of mother and daughter script, but the mother was the focus, and it wasn't about her as a mother, it was about her as it's a modern retelling of Ceres and Proserpine, a myth. So it was her as a warrior, in a modern day setting. So she was just a fierce gardener. It's better than it sounds. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for the support. But, so I try and look for that actively now. And yeah, with Black Samphire, which is the feature that stars Stephen Fry, the protagonist also Kathy Tyson. She's a BAFTA-winning and Emmy-nominated amazing actress who has had this illustrious career, twice my age. So it requires people who are younger to also get to be part of that, as we've said with men. You know, how can we be allies and make sure that we're not perpetuating those, you know, stories?
Actually, I saw a picture of Sharon Stone earlier in now, and she's unashamedly doesn't wear makeup, deliberately so. Very interesting. Anyway, that wasn't my point. I was just picking up on that. Book idea, possibly.
Okay, love this.
And the segue into it is Mothers of the Revolution film about Greenham Common. And putting my researcher hat on, which is one of the hats I wear, I would love to interview women who were at Greenham Common or Fastlane in the 80s and see what their opinions are now to how the world has changed, not just in context of nuclear, but just generally about, well, the film title was Mothers of the Revolution. And having been around then and seen them on TV every day on the news, I'd love to hear their perspective on what they think has happened to the world. So if you arrange that and want somebody to do the interviews with them, because they'd probably, well, the youngest would be in their 60s now, probably 70s, be the average age, I would say. Anyway, I think their perspective would be very interesting.
I love that. And I also love that as a doc. I think there's a really, really brilliant documentary film there as well, because that is so visual also. And
Mothers of the Revolution
exists. Okay.
I think it's a documentary.
I'm going to, well, let's get put in touch, please, Vicky. Thank you. Very interesting.
Any other questions in the room? No? If not, thank you so much, Kat. Thank you so much, Tina and Aisha. Really appreciate it. Great talk. Sadly, Afsal, our new head of membership, couldn't be here today, but for those of you who aren't members and those of you that are, he will be at the next event, and he will also be available to have a chat to any of you whenever you want. So we're looking forward to introducing him to One Club properly. And thank you so much again to both of you. It's been a great interview, very thought-provoking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.